happy home. And happy St. Patrick's Day. I've got my green on. I hope you do too. We're going to make a kind of an American innocent version of Irish stew today, and it's very easy and very quick if you have a hot pot. I'm starting with ground beef, and that is not traditional. Traditionally, you'd use lamb or mutton. Not a fan of either one of those, and so I just used a very lean ground beef. In fact, I used patties and just cooked them up till they were nice and brown. And so that's what this is right here. I will show you that process very briefly. We're going to start this recipe off by browning some very lean beef. Now, traditionally an Irish stew would have ground lamb or mutton, but we're Americans. We always improve on everybody's cuisine, and in my mind, using beef instead of lamb or mutton is going to be a big improvement. Also, traditionally, they would be chunks and not ground, but this is 90% lean or 92% lean hamburger, and so it's going to make a chewy patty when it's done, and I'll just cut it up into chunks, and it's a lot quicker than messing with the regular stew meat. And we can get it nice and brown all the way through, so the flavor is really nice and rich and meaty. And once these have gotten to where they're pretty brown, I'm going to add the onions to just kind of caramelize them up a little bit, add a little bit of sweetness, and then we'll be ready to toss it all together. I've added one large onion, coarsely chopped. And now that the meat has, some of the fat has cooked out of the meat, I'm just going to get this onion a little bit caramelized so that it'll add a sweetness to the stew that is going to be very pleasant. This is all brown, and I have drained the grease away. I am a little suspicious of the claim that that was 93% lean hamburger, because it seemed to yield a lot more grease than what you would expect 1 pound of lean hamburger to do. Usually there's nothing to drain, but drained away probably 4 tablespoons. So now I'm going to deglaze the pan by adding 5 cups of water. And that will get all of the browning off of the sides of the pan. And while I've got this going, I'm going to add the flavoring, or my favorite bouillon, which is the Better Than Bouillon brand. This is going to add all the salt that we need for this recipe. Even though the vegetables, you know, will need a fair amount of salt in order to keep them pleasant tasting. So we'll just let that come up to a nice boil, or a simmer. So we're at this stage, all we're really doing is heating it up, and we'll blend in that bouillon, and then it'll be ready to go into the electric pressure cooker. What I just put in there is 5 cups of water, 1 very large onion coarsely chopped, a pound of browned ground beef, and 2 tablespoons of Better Than Bouillon soup base. So to this I will add a generous, probably the equivalent of 2 tablespoons of minced garlic, a similar amount of tomato paste. Now, you may know that tomatoes are American. They're native to America, so they wouldn't have been in a long time ago Irish stew. But since lots and lots of Irish came to America in the 1800s during the Great Potato Famine, about the time, I think it was just after the Civil War that the Great Potato Famine happened, they can use tomatoes. They can use American tomatoes in their stew if they want to. and I'm going to. So I'm also going to add a little bit of pepper. So that this has plenty of flavor. The issue in my mind is that potatoes, carrots, onions, well, onions have a lot of flavor, but the potatoes and the carrots do not. And I'm also adding celery just because I like celery in a beef stew. And it would not have been in a traditional stew, the Irish, but Americans have the privilege of taking foods from all around the world, adding their own touches and ingredients, and forming them to our own taste. So this is 3 good-sized potatoes that have been chopped. I left the skins on them. It's a little piece that doesn't need to go in the stew. I left the skins on just because it'll add a little bit of flavor. I mean, add a little bit of fiber, and hopefully no flavor. They were well scrubbed. So there's 4 average size carrots, 3 medium potatoes chopped into that size of a cube, bite-sized cubes, and 3, well, it's more like 2.5 stalks of celery that are also chopped into bite-sized chunks. So that's what we have going in our stew pot. But, oh dear, I should have worn an apron. I didn't want to cover up my green sweater. So that will make a very hearty, tasty soup. Since everything in here is cooked, I'm going to go ahead and taste it. Make sure that it has enough. You know what? It doesn't have quite enough of the beef bouillon. I don't think I'm going to add a little bit of that. You want this to be a really flavorful dish, and so you need to be generous with the soup base. And if you like a thicker, creamier stew than this is going to turn out to be, you may want to think about adding a can of cream soup. Some of the Irish recipes don't call for a can of cream soup, but I've used it a lot, and it works really nicely just to bring the flavor out and make it a little bit more of a creamy texture in the finished stew. So this is about full up to here. It looks very hearty. Okay, all the ingredients are in the hot pot. Now we'll set this on high pressure for 30 minutes. And the vegetables will be tender and it will be ready to serve. And so while that is cooking, we'll make the Irish soda bread. Soda bread is a yeastless batter, and it rises using baking soda, hence the name soda bread. We're going to start with 4 cups of whole wheat flour. Now the Irish traditionally are, in historical times obviously, were a caste society, and so the lairds over the land would have the wealth and they would live like kings, and then there were peasants, and there wasn't any middle class. And so their meals would have been very simple. Root vegetables that would store in their own root cellars, and mostly a lot of potatoes. But they would also use turnips and things like that. This is going to be a fancy Irish soda bread because I'm actually having company today for St. Patrick's Day. So I'm going to add some raisins to it. So I've got about 1/2 cup of raisins here, a generous 1/2 cup. Now, traditionally they would use sour milk or buttermilk in their soda bread because the baking soda needs some sort of acid to cause the reaction so it'll start rising. But I don't have any buttermilk, so I'm going to instead use 1.5 cups of regular milk. This is actually powdered milk that's been reconstituted. It doesn't matter at all what you use. And I'm going to add 1/2 tablespoon of lemon juice, and that will be, that will be enough, plenty, to activate that baking soda. and essentially turn this into buttermilk, which that's a trick that you can do in any recipe that calls for baking soda and you need a little bit of acid to activate it. Go ahead and add some lemon juice or even some vinegar. So here is a 1/4 cup of sugar, which is more sugar than they would traditionally use also, but forgive me for that. I want it to be just a little bit sweet. This is a teaspoon of salt. And so we have the salt, and we need a teaspoon and a half. So I think I have a 1/2 tablespoon measure. Yep, that's what that is. So I'm going to add, that's 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking soda. So we've got the sweetener, the leavening. So I'm adding 3 tablespoons of oil to the milk and lemon juice combination. And then last, I'm going to add the raisins to the milk because I want those raisins to hydrate just a little bit. Rehydrate, I should say. So I'll give that a little bit of a stir so that those, and I can see that the milk is curdling, so that's a good thing. You want it to curdle if you have plain old sour milk. I'll give this a little bit of a whisk and then stir the wet into the dry with all the raisins. I have my oven preheating to 400 already. And this should make a fairly stiff dough. Let's see what that looks like. It's not even completely combined yet. This is red wheat that I ground just before I started the camera. Now, here's a little trick that every cook should know. Before you put the bread in the oven, taste it. Taste the dough. If you've forgotten the salt, it will all be ruined, and it's worth just taking a little sample to make sure. Salt is in there. Of course, you knew that. Okay, this is a heavy Dutch oven. If you have a cast iron pan, that will work, or you can use a cookie sheet and just bake it in a lump. So I've got this all mixed. I'm just going to gather it up in my hand, kind of form it into a little bit of a loaf. You can see it's a very, very sticky dough, but it tastes good. So I'm going to just smooth it out a little bit by putting a little bit of oil on my hand, and the pan is already greased, so this way I can form it up into kind of a loaf. So that it won't be too rough of a surface. And then traditionally, this soda bread only took about 45 minutes in the oven, and it was at 350 for the last half hour or so. But you can hear it sounds very hollow. It's doubled in size. Now I'm not quite ready to serve it, and I don't want it to cool off completely because soda bread is definitely better while it's nice and warm. So I'm going to put a lid on it and keep it warm until I'm ready to serve it. You can see that this Irish stew is all cooked and savory and gonna warm you body and soul. But I prefer a little bit of a thicker sauce to this than this. And so I could pour off some of this liquid and thicken it with a couple of tablespoons of flour and then stir it back in. But rather than do that, I'm going to use the cheater method and just pour in a can of cream soup. And it's going to thicken it up And it's also going to just add a nice little bit of creaminess as an undertone. So just stir it in without diluting it anymore. You can see it blends in really well and gives it a more stew-like consistency rather than a soup. So it's still fairly runny. I happen to use cream of chicken, cream of mushroom, cream of celery. Either of those would work fine. So here you have the traditional Irish meal. You've got soda bread that's done in a hurry, and I added some raisins to it to give it a little perky flavor, and this nice, savory, heart and soul warming beef stew. Ordinarily it would be made with mutton, as I said, but it's delicious and it's done easily and quickly. That'll warm you up on a cold day. Thanks for visiting me here on Beth's Happy Home, and I wish you happy homemaking.